In the heart of Brooklyn, tucked beneath the low growl of the BQE overpass, there was a place most people passed without a second glance. Its windows were fogged with age, its sign, the velvet note, faded to a soft charcoal. But inside, especially on Thursday nights, the air hummed with something older than the city itself. Music. Not the kind that blasted from speakers or chased trends, but the kind that seeped into your bones, slow and steady, like rain soaking into dry earth. Behind the clink of glasses and the murmur of late-night conversations moved a woman most guests barely noticed. Her name was Leora, though few ever asked for it. She wore a simple black dress with a white apron tied neatly around her waist. Her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun that always seemed to be escaping its pins. She moved quietly, efficiently, refilling water glasses before they were empty, clearing plates the moment forks were set down, smiling just enough to be polite but never enough to invite chatter. To the regulars, she was part of the furniture, reliable, invisible, forgettable. But Leora wasn't forgettable, not really. If you watched closely, you'd notice how her eyes lingered on the old upright piano in the far corner every time she passed it. It wasn't a grand instrument. Its wood was scratched, one of the pedals stuck if you pressed too hard, and the high C was slightly out of tune. Yet to her it was sacred. That piano had been there longer than she had, older than the current owner, Benny, who'd inherited the place from his uncle. And every Tuesday and Thursday after the last customer left and the chairs were stacked upside down on the tables, Leora would stay behind. Not because she had to, her shift ended at midnight, but because she couldn't leave without touching those keys. She never played when anyone was around. Not out of fear exactly, but out of habit. For years, music had been her private world, the one place no one could reach her. She'd learned as a child in Manila, sitting on her grandmother's lap as wrinkled hands guided hers across a sun-bleached keyboard in a tiny apartment above a bakery. The scent of pandesal and the sound of Chopin filled her earliest memories. Her Lola, her grandmother, had been a concert pianist once before the war scattered her family and silenced her career. But she never stopped playing. Music isn't for showing off, she'd say in Tagalog, her voice soft but firm. It's for telling the truth when words fail. Leora carried those words like a secret talisman. When her Lola passed away during her teenage years, Leora stopped playing in front of others. Not because she lost the skill, she practiced daily in silence, but because sharing felt like opening a wound. So she buried it. She moved to New York at 21 with little more than a suitcase and a worn copy of Debussy's Clair de Lune. Took the job at the Velvet Note because it was near a practice room she could afford for 2 hours a week, and because Benny didn't ask questions. He saw her wipe down the piano one night and simply said, "You play?" She nodded. He never pressed further. Life settled into a rhythm. Mornings at a laundromat folding strangers' clothes, afternoons studying music theory from library books, evenings serving wine and small talk to people who never looked her in the eye. She didn't mind the invisibility. In a city of millions shouting to be seen, being unseen felt like a kind of peace. But peace, she was learning, could also feel like loneliness. One Thursday, the rain came down in sheets, turning the sidewalks into rivers and the subway into a sauna of damp coats and sighs. The usual crowd thinned, but a group of 5 men stayed late, laughing loudly over bottles of bourbon. They were well-dressed, suits slightly rumpled, ties loosened, and spoke with the easy confidence of people used to being heard. One of them, a man with silver at his temples and a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, kept glancing at the piano. He was Darius, though Leora didn't know his name yet. He was passing through town, visiting an old friend who owned a recording studio nearby. He hadn't planned to stop at the Velvet Note, but the rain had other ideas. When the house pianist, a gentle man named Eli, called in sick with the flu, Benny panicked. "No, Eli, no music," he muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. And no music, no mood. And no mood. He trailed off, eyeing the rowdy table. One of the men joked, "Why don't you put the waitress on? She's always hovering around that piano like it's her long-lost lover." The table roared with laughter. Another mimicked her posture, shoulders slightly hunched, tray held close as if she were some timid ghost. Leora, wiping down the bar just feet away, felt her cheeks burn. She kept her eyes down, but her hands trembled. Benny saw it. He'd known her for 3 years. He'd seen her cry once quietly in the storage closet after a phone call from home. He'd seen her leave a $20 tip for a struggling musician who couldn't pay his tab. He knew she wasn't just passing time here, she was waiting. Waiting for something to change, or maybe for permission to believe she deserved more. So when the laughter died down and the men turned back to their drinks, Benny walked over to Leora in the kitchen. "You don't have to," he said softly. "But if you ever wanted to, tonight's as good as any." She looked at him, eyes wide. "They'll laugh again," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe they'll finally see you." She didn't answer. But when she walked out of the kitchen a minute later, she didn't head for the coat rack. She walked straight to the piano, her apron still tied, her shoes squeaking slightly on the wet floor. The room fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. She sat, took a breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. What happened next wasn't magic in the flashy sense, no lightning, no standing ovation yet. But something shifted in the air like the moment before dawn when the world holds its breath. She began to play, softly at first like she was testing the waters. Then, as if remembering who she was, her hands found their voice again, and the room listened. The first note hung in the air like a question, soft, uncertain, almost apologetic. Leora's fingers hovered over the keys, her breath shallow. Around her, the lounge had gone still. No clinking glasses, no murmured jokes, not even the usual hum of the refrigerator behind the bar. The 5 men at the corner table had stopped mid-laugh, their glasses halfway to their lips. Even Benny, standing near the kitchen door with a dish towel bunched in his fist, seemed to stop breathing. Then she played the second note. And the third. And suddenly it wasn't hesitation anymore, it was a story unfolding. She started with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece her grandmother used to play on humid Manila evenings when the power went out, and the only light came from candles flickering on the windowsill. Her touch was gentle but sure, each phrase shaped with a quiet ache that felt lived in, not rehearsed. The melody drifted through the room like smoke, thin at first, then curling around every chair, every person, until it was impossible to ignore. One of the men, tall, with sharp cheekbones and a watch that probably cost more than Leora made in a year, leaned forward slowly, his elbows on the table. His name was Darius, though she didn't know that yet. He'd spent the last 15 years listening to musicians in studios, concert halls, subway platforms, and hotel lobbies. He'd heard technical perfection, flashy runs, soulless virtuosity polished to a shine. But this was different. This wasn't performance. It was confession. By the time she reached the middle section, the part where the music swells with longing before folding back into quiet, Darius had set his glass down. His friends had stopped whispering. Even the rain outside seemed to soften, as if the city itself was holding its breath. When she finished, her hands rested lightly on the keys. No flourish, no bow, just silence. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then, from the back booth, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was Benny. Then another patron, a woman who'd been nursing a cup of tea in the corner, joined in. Soon the whole room was applauding, not out of pity or surprise, but out of something deeper. Recognition. They'd just witnessed something real. Leora's face burned. She stood quickly, smoothing her apron, eyes fixed on the floor. She wanted to vanish, to slip out the back door and walk home in the rain, pretend this never happened. But before she could move, a voice cut through the noise. That was extraordinary. She looked up. Darius was standing a few feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, but not so close that it felt invasive. He didn't smile in that practiced, charming way some men did. His expression was serious, almost reverent. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked. She swallowed. "My grandmother," she said quietly. "In the Philippines, before everything changed." He nodded slowly, as if that explained everything, which in a way it did. He didn't ask for her number. Didn't offer empty praise like "you should be famous," or "you're wasting your talent here." Instead, he said, "Do you write your own music?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, just little things. Nothing finished." "I'd love to hear one," he said. "If you're willing." She glanced at Benny, who gave her the tiniest nod. So she sat back down. This time she played something she'd been working on for months. A piece without a name, stitched together from memories. The sound of rain on her Lola's tin roof. The rhythm of the jeepneys rattling down Quezon Avenue. The quiet hum of grief after the funeral. It began with a simple left-hand pattern, steady as a heartbeat, then layered in chords that shimmered like heat rising off pavement. Halfway through, she added a melody that felt both ancient and brand new, like a lullaby for someone who'd forgotten how to sleep. When she finished, Darius didn't clap. He just stood there for a long moment, then said, "I produce music. Not pop, not background noise. Real music. The kind that stays with you." He reached into his coat and pulled out a plain black card. No logo, just a name and a phone number. "If you ever want to record even just one song, call me." No pressure. No strings. She took the card. It felt heavier than it should. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The men left soon after, but not before Darius turned at the door and said, "You didn't just play the piano tonight. You owned it." Leora didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. After closing, Benny didn't say much either. He just handed her an extra 20 and said, "Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day." But his eyes said more. "You were seen tonight. Really seen." She walked home in the drizzle, the card tucked safely in her pocket, her fingers still tingling from the keys. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt possible, but possibility is a tricky thing. It doesn't come with guarantees. It comes with questions. What if she called him and it led nowhere? What if she recorded something and people hated it? What if stepping into the light meant losing the quiet safety of the shadows she'd grown used to? Back in her tiny apartment, a single room above a bodega with a window that rattled when trucks passed, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the card. Outside, the city never slept. Sirens wailed in the distance. A couple argued on the sidewalk. Life went on loud and messy and full of risk. She thought about her Lola, who'd once told her, "Music isn't meant to stay locked inside you. It's meant to find its way out, even if your hands shake." Leora placed the card on her nightstand. She didn't call that night, but she didn't throw it away either. And for the first time in a long time, when she closed her eyes, she didn't dream of silence. She dreamed of sound, clear, strong, and entirely her own. The card sat on Leora's nightstand for 6 days. Every morning she'd glance at it while brushing her teeth. Every night she'd stare at it before turning off the light. She didn't call, not because she didn't want to, but because wanting something too much scared her. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant risking disappointment, and she'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. But life has a way of nudging you when you're stuck. On the 7th day, Benny called in sick with a stomach bug, and the new manager, a brisk woman named Tessa who cared more about turnover than tone, announced they'd be playing recorded jazz instead of live music until Eli recovered. "Saves money," she said, shrugging as if ambiance were just another line item on a spreadsheet. That night, the lounge felt hollow. The canned saxophone sounded tinny, distant like music heard through a wall. Customers lingered less. Tips dropped, and Leora kept catching herself glancing at the piano, now covered with a dusty cloth like a forgotten relic. After her shift, she walked home with her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets, rain misting her face. She passed a street musician playing a worn-out keyboard under a flickering street lamp. His fingers moved with joy even though his open case held only a few coins. He wasn't playing for fame or fortune. He was playing because he had to. Because the music wouldn't let him be still. Something clicked inside her. The next morning, before her shift, she dialed the number on the card. Darius answered on the second ring. "No, hello, just a warm. I was wondering when you'd call." They met 2 days later in a small studio in Greenpoint. Not the kind with neon signs and gold records on the wall, but a converted garage with soundproof foam, mismatched chairs, and a piano that had seen better decades. Sunlight streamed through a skylight, dust motes dancing in the beams. "You don't need to impress me," Darius said as she sat at the piano, fingers hovering nervously. "Just play like you did that night." Like no one's listening. She took a breath and played not the Chopin, not the piece from Manila. This time she played something newer, something raw, built from sleepless nights and subway rides and the ache of being unseen for so long. It started slow, almost hesitant, then grew bolder, weaving in rhythms from Filipino folk songs her Lola used to hum while cooking, blending them with modern harmonies she'd discovered in late-night YouTube deep dives. When she finished, Darius was silent for a long time. Then he said, "That's not just music. That's a voice." They recorded 3 pieces that day, just piano, no vocals, no effects. Darius insisted on keeping it pure. Your hands say enough, he told her. He didn't talk about contracts or labels or viral potential. He talked about mood, about space, about letting silence speak as loudly as sound. Over the next few weeks, they met twice more. Each session felt less like work and more like conversation. Darius never pushed. He'd suggest a slight change in tempo or ask, "What if you held that note a little longer?" But always as a question, never a command. He treated her music like it was already whole. He was just helping her polish the edges. Meanwhile, back at the Velvet Note, word had spread. Regulars started asking, "When's the waitress playing again?" Tessa rolled her eyes, but Benny, back from his sickbed, quietly told Leora, "If you ever want to sit in on a slow night, the piano's yours." She did. Once. Just a short set during the lull between dinner and late crowd. No announcement. She simply walked over, sat down, and began. This time no one laughed. No one even whispered. They just listened. And when she finished, a woman at the bar wiped her eyes and said, "Thank you. I needed that." That small moment meant more than any applause. Still, doubt crept in. Late at night, lying awake, Leora would wonder, was this real? Or just a fluke? Maybe Darius was being kind. Maybe people were just being polite. Maybe she was fooling herself into thinking she belonged in a world that had never made room for her before. One afternoon, while folding napkins during her break, she overheard two customers talking. "That pianist last week, she used to work here, right?" One said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Waitress by day, genius by night." "Wild, huh?" Leora froze. Genius. The word felt too big, too bright. But it also felt true. Darius invited her to a small listening session, a gathering of musicians, producers, and a few trusted friends in his living room. No stage, no spotlight, just a circle of people on couches and floor cushions. She played her newest piece, one she'd written about her Lola's hands, how they'd been strong enough to knead dough and delicate enough to coax beauty from ivory keys. Afterward, an older woman with silver braids came up to her. "My mother played piano too," she said softly. "She stopped after the war, said the world didn't want to hear sad songs anymore." She paused, eyes glistening. "But your music, it doesn't feel sad. It feels like healing." Leora didn't know what to say, so she just hugged her. That night, walking home under a sky full of stars, she realized something. She wasn't doing this for fame, not even for validation. She was doing it because the music had been waiting inside her, patient and persistent, and now it finally had a path out. And every time she played, she wasn't just honoring her grandmother, she was becoming herself. Darius called the next day. "I've got an offer," he said. A small indie label wanted to release her EP. Just 5 tracks, no frills, digital only. They'd handle distribution, promotion, the basics. "It's not $1 million deal," he warned. "But it's real, and it's yours." She said yes. Not because she was sure it would change her life, but because for the first time, she trusted that her voice mattered. Even if only a few people heard it, even if it never left this city, it mattered, and that was enough. The offer felt like a door opening. But Leora stood in the hallway, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, unsure if she should step through. It wasn't that she didn't want it, she did, more than she'd ever admitted out loud. But saying yes meant stepping into a world where people would judge her music, dissect it, maybe even dismiss it. And worse, what if she disappointed the few people who already believed in her? Benny, who'd handed her that extra 20 like a quiet blessing. Darius, who'd listened like her notes were sacred. The woman with silver braids who'd seen her grandmother in Leora's hands. She spent days saying nothing. She showed up for her shifts at the Velvet Note like nothing had changed. But inside, her mind was a storm. She'd wipe down tables and imagine headlines. Waitress turned pianist flops on debut. Or worse, silence. No headlines at all. Just another forgotten voice in a city full of them. One rainy afternoon, Benny found her in the back, restocking sugar packets with more force than necessary. "You're thinking too hard," he said, leaning against the doorframe with his usual calm. "I can hear it from here," she gave a weak smile. "What if I'm not ready?" "Nobody's ever ready," he said, tossing her a clean rag. "You just do it anyway." "Your Lola didn't wait for permission to play, did she?" Leora shook her head. "She played even when there was no electricity. Even when the neighbors complained. She said music wasn't a luxury, it was breath." "Then stop holding yours," Benny said gently. That night she called Darius. "I'll do it," she said. "But I need it, to be honest. No fancy photo shoots. No fake backstory. Just the music. Good, he replied, because that's the only kind worth sharing. They began recording in earnest. Not in a glossy studio, but in that same garage-turned studio. Early in the morning when the city was still quiet, Leora wore the same sweater she always did, soft, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and played barefoot just like she had as a child. Darius set up one microphone. No overdubs, no corrections. If she made a mistake, they kept it. That's what makes it human, he said. The sessions were slow, intimate. Sometimes they'd take breaks and sit on the curb, sipping coffee from paper cups, talking about nothing and everything, his early days sleeping on couches while chasing sound, her memories of Manila's monsoon rains tapping on the roof like a metronome. There was no pressure, no timeline, just trust. But outside that room, the world moved faster. Tessa, the new manager, started hinting that Leora's side gig was making her distracted. One night, after she forgot to bring extra napkins to a table, Tessa snapped, "You think you're too good for this place now?" Leora didn't argue. She just apologized and brought the napkins. But that night, walking home, she wondered, was she trying to leave one life behind before she even had another to step into? Doubt returned like an old friend, unwelcome but familiar. She scrolled through social media and saw musicians with thousands of followers. Flawless performances, perfect lighting. Her hands didn't look like theirs. Her story wasn't dramatic enough. No rags to riches tale, no viral moment. Just years of silence, then a piano in a dim bar. She almost backed out twice. The first time she drafted a text to Darius. "I don't think I can do this." She deleted it before sending. The second time she stayed late at the lounge after closing, sat at the piano and played for no one but herself. Halfway through she stopped, tears blurring her vision. "Why's this so hard?" she whispered to the empty room. Then she remembered her Lola's voice, clear as if she were standing beside her. "Ang takot ay normal, pero huwag mong hayaan na pigilan ka. Fear is normal, but don't let it stop you." The next morning she went to the studio and played her heart out. As the tracks came together, something shifted. The music wasn't just notes anymore, it was a map of her journey. The quiet opening piece, Manila Rain, carried the hush of childhood evenings. Velvet Hands honored Benny's quiet faith in her. The final track, Still Here, was a simple melody that rose and fell like breath, proof that she hadn't disappeared, even when the world acted like she had. Darius sent the final files to the label. They loved it. Said it felt like a conversation, not a performance. They planned a soft release, no big launch, just a quiet drop on streaming platforms. A few posts on music blogs, maybe a local radio feature, Leora told Benny first. He didn't say much, just nodded, then poured her a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon like it was a toast. "You earned this," he said. She told her family in the Philippines over a crackling video call. Her younger cousin cried. Her uncle, usually stoic, said, "Your Lola would be dancing in the kitchen right now." But the biggest test came when Darius asked, "Would you play live again?" Not at the lounge. Somewhere new. Small but real. Her stomach twisted. What if no one comes? What if they do? He countered. She thought about it all night. Then early the next morning she said yes, not because she was fearless, but because she finally understood. The music wasn't hers to keep. It was hers to give, and giving it meant showing up even when her hands shook, even when her voice wavered, even when the world might not notice. She booked a tiny venue in the East Village, just 30 seats, brick walls, a single spotlight over the piano. The night of the show she arrived early, wearing the same black dress from her waitressing days, only this time there was no apron. Just her, the piano, and the quiet hum of possibility. As she waited backstage, listening to the murmur of early arrivals, she didn't pray for perfection. She just whispered, "Let me be true," and for the first time, that felt like enough. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor down the block and the distant hum of city traffic. Inside the small East Village venue, barely bigger than a living room, 30 chairs were arranged in a loose semicircle around an old baby grand piano. No velvet ropes, no flashing lights, just warm bulbs strung along the brick walls and a single spotlight trained on the instrument. Leora stood in the hallway just off stage, her fingers tracing the edge of her dress. She wasn't wearing anything fancy, Just the same black dress she'd worn while waiting tables, cleaned and pressed, but still familiar. It grounded her, reminded her where she'd come from and why she was here. Darius appeared beside her, holding 2 paper cups of tea. "Nervous?" he asked, handing her one. "A little," she admitted. "That's good," he said. "Means you care." She took a slow breath. The room beyond the curtain was already filling. Some faces she recognized from the velvet note, a few from Darius's listening circle, even her cousin, who'd flown in from Manila just for this. But most were strangers. People who'd heard a snippet online, read a short write-up in a local blog, or simply followed a friend's suggestion. They didn't know her story. They only knew her sound, and that was enough. When the host called her name, she walked out, not with a flourish, not with practiced confidence, but with quiet steps, like someone entering a sacred space. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. No grand announcement, no dramatic pause. She simply began. She opened with Manila Rain, the piece that started it all. The notes fell like drops on a tin roof, gentle, steady, full of memory. Halfway through, a baby in the back cooed softly, and instead of flinching, Leora smiled mid-phrase and let the sound blend into the music. It felt right, human, real. By the second piece, the room had settled into a deep hush. Not the kind of silence that's empty, but the kind that's full, of attention, of feeling, of shared breath. She played Velvet Hands next, weaving in a melody Benny once hummed while counting the register. She could almost see him in the third row, arms crossed, eyes suspiciously bright. When she reached the final piece, Still Here, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a homecoming. Her fingers moved with a certainty she hadn't felt since she was a child on her Lola's lap. The music rose, not loud but clear, like a voice finally finding its place in the world. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a heartbeat. Then applause, not thunderous but warm, steady like rain after a long drought. People stood not out of obligation, but because they'd been moved. Afterward, they lingered. A woman with tired eyes told her, "I lost my mom last year." That last piece, it felt like she was saying goodbye. A young man, barely older than a teenager, shyly asked if she gave lessons. An older couple held hands as they thanked her, saying they hadn't heard live piano like this in decades. Leora didn't have grand answers. She just listened, said thank you, hugged who needed hugging. Later, back at the Velvet Note, where she still worked 2 shifts a week because old habits die hard and rent doesn't vanish, Benny handed her a drink. "You owned that room," he said. "I just played," she replied. "That's the point," he said. "You didn't try to be anyone else. You just showed up as you." Over the next few months, small things began to change. Her EP, released quietly online, started appearing on curated playlists. A college radio station in Chicago played Still Here every Sunday night. A music teacher in Toronto used Manila Rain in her class to teach emotional phrasing. None of it was viral. None of it made headlines. But it mattered, because it reached the people who needed to hear it. She kept working at the lounge, not out of necessity, but by choice. "I don't want to forget what it feels like to be unseen," she told Darius once. He understood. She also started playing once a month at the East Village spot, always unannounced, always intimate. No tickets. Just a sign on the door, "Piano tonight. Come if you need to listen." One evening, nearly a year after that first performance, she returned to the Velvet Note, not as staff, but as the featured artist. Benny had insisted. "Full circle," he'd said. The same booth where she'd once served coffee now held strangers who'd traveled from New Jersey, from upstate, even from Montreal, just to hear her play. The same piano, still slightly out of tune, still missing a keycap, waited for her in the corner. She walked to it, sat down, and played the Chopin Nocturne from that rainy Thursday night. But this time it wasn't an apology. It wasn't a plea for attention. It was a statement. A quiet declaration that she belonged, not because someone gave her permission, but because she'd earned her place through years of silence, practice, and courage. When she finished, the room didn't erupt. It simply exhaled as if everyone had been holding their breath together. She didn't bow. She didn't smile for the cameras, though a few phones were raised not to capture her image but to remember the feeling. Instead, she looked out at the faces, really looked and said softly, "Thank you for finally listening." After the set, a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, approached her, clutching a notebook. "Can I learn to play like you?" she asked, eyes wide. Leora knelt down. "You don't have to play like me," she said gently. "You just have to play like you." The girl nodded, serious, and ran back to her mother, already humming a tune of her own. Leora watched her go, then glanced at the piano. The city outside roared on, cars honking, sirens wailing, life rushing forward. But in that room, for a moment, there was peace. Not the kind that comes from being unnoticed, but the kind that comes from being truly seen. And that, she realized, was the real music.